Late March, 1913. Chilo, Ohio. A man stands on a ridge west of town. The church bell has been underwater since yesterday morning. The river has taken everything below the roofline. He arrived 3 days earlier on a Baltimore and Ohio freight car out of Cincinnati. The swollen river smell reached him before the town did. He had no particular reason to stay. Chilo was a town of about 300 people at the confluence of the Little Miami and the Ohio. It had been larger. By 1913, the river that built it had become the thing it couldn't manage. When the roads flooded on the 23rd, most people left. He moved to higher ground instead. His name does not appear in any relief record from this week. No explanation survives. Spring 1913, Southern Ohio. A man following the river followed the work, mills, landings, rail yards. He moved east from Cincinnati on the Baltimore and Ohio line, hopping freight between stops. He reached the Chilo area in the third week of March, following a rumor of millwork at a landing east of town. The positions had filled 2 weeks before he arrived. Rain started on the 21st, a late March downpour in Ohio, the kind that passes. This one didn't. By the next morning, the creek at the town's edge had left its banks. Chilo had watched the river rise with every spring thaw and absorbed its seasonal floods. The town knew the rhythm. What arrived on March 23rd broke every pattern it recognized. Both rivers swelled simultaneously. The Little Miami and the Ohio rose together, sealing every road out of Chilo within a single day. The record marks it precisely. March 23, 1913. That evening he moved uphill without deliberation, just seeking dry ground. A ridge west of town sat above the flood line and he reached it. The notes record no decision, only the fact. By morning of the 24th, the lower end of Main Street was underwater. Those who could leave had. Others carried what they owned up to the church, which sat on slightly higher ground. His name appears in none of the relief documents from this week. Not as a claimant, not as a witness, not as a laborer. Whether by omission or lost pages, the record doesn't explain. His name hasn't surfaced yet in the records from this week. Subscribe if you want to be here when it does, or when the picture of why he stayed finally comes into focus. There may be more to this man than a ridge and 3 days of silence. On the ridge, he survived on what traveling men carried in 1913. Cornbread or hardtack, a tin cup, dried pork if recent work had paid. 3 days above the flood line, all watching. What he witnessed wasn't confined to Chilo. Understanding it requires stepping back. Every major river in Ohio was rising that same week, turning the whole state into a geography of loss. On March 24th, the same morning Chilo's streets went under, Dayton lost 360 people to the Great Miami River. 65,000 residents displaced in a single day. The rainfall had been staggering, 9 to 11 inches in the worst counties, falling on ground already saturated from snowmelt. The rivers had nowhere to go but outward, and they went. From the ridge, he tracked the flood's movement by what it carried. Fence posts first, then barn planks, and by the second day, a wooden chair with 3 inches of freeboard remaining. He had studied a county wall map at the Batavia courthouse 3 weeks before arriving. Chilo's street grid, the church location, the mill road to the landing. He held the layout in memory, now watching that mental map flood in real time. The street grid, the church, the mill road, each disappearing in the sequence the water found them, low point by low point, block by block. Chilo traced back to the flatboat era, a documented trading waypoint on the Little Miami when river commerce meant everything. By 1913, only the street pattern remained of that history. By morning of the 25th, Main Street had ceased to exist as a distinct feature. The water had erased the grade entirely, made it indistinguishable from the river itself. The church roofline was the last visible structure. That bell would ring again eventually after the silt cleared and damage was assessed. But in these hours, it hung silent. 15 feet below the surface, the state cataloged $92 million in damages across the affected counties. Columbus dispatched relief trains on the 27th. None reached Clermont County for 4 days. By then, the water was already retreating. What relief records never captured? Men without addresses, without property names, without anything to file a claim on. The county had no instrument for accounting for someone who owned nothing that could flood. When the water began dropping on the 26th, the southern rail line was still submerged. From the ridge, some 3 routes. Wait for the tracks to clear, head north to Batavia, or follow the ridge east. Ohio had no organized state disaster relief system in 1913. What reached the flooded towns came through the Red Cross, church networks, and county sheriffs improvising with whatever they had. The water dropped roughly 2 feet on the 26th, then 3 more on the 27th, fast enough to watch. The town reappeared in stages, piece by piece, and the flood gave it back. Church roof first, then the mill's gable ends, then upper windows of the storefronts, pale and still above the receding line. A town emerging from the bottom of something that had no name. When Main Street emerged on the morning of the 28th, the silt had settled into every low place, every channel, every corner. The street grid was legible in the mud, every block defined. Every block exactly where the county map had placed it. Every lot line preserved. The water erased the streets themselves, but the silt redrew them in perfect correspondence with the survey. The county map had been drawn from surveys of the actual streets. The water erased them. The silt redrew them. The map had not changed, only the town's capacity to hold its own shape. The map and the mud were in agreement. Every survey had traced the same streets now pressed into silt. The flood had confirmed what the county had drawn. The town was real. And what happened to it was real. Chilo didn't vanish after 1913. It diminished. Families who left for Batavia and Cincinnati mostly didn't return. The millwork that anchored the town's purpose never came back with them. The 1920 census showed fewer people than 1910. The 1930 count showed fewer still. What the water had set in motion, the Depression would complete, layered onto a decline already underway. In the weeks after the flood, law enforcement had no capacity to enforce vagrancy laws. Too many displaced people moving in too many directions. The roads of southern Ohio ran on suspended rules. He left the ridge on the 28th once the rail line south of town was passable, heading southeast along the Ohio, away from the organized cleanup and relief trains finally arriving. The roads east of Chilo in late March were what flood roads always are. Mud over everything, soft bridges, rail ties warped where water had rested longest, saw crossings that could not be trusted. A man on foot could move where trains still couldn't. The warped rail ties and soft embankments that stopped locomotives were navigable on foot. He had that small advantage, and he used it. What he carried from Chilo isn't specified. The notes don't list it. What they do record is the silence, the particular quality of silence a flooded town produces when the water has taken the commerce. No dogs, no wagon wheels on the road, no commerce moving, just the water, what it carried, and the sound it made against the church walls. A town reduced to its own acoustics. A Red Cross field report from Clermont County, March 1913, noted without further detail that several men had sheltered on the ridge above Chilo during peak flooding and were gone before relief workers arrived. The 1913 flood eventually prompted the Miami Conservancy District, an engineering project that built 5 dry dams across the Great Miami watershed by 1922. 9 years and $90 million between disaster and solution. But Chilo lay outside the Conservancy's jurisdiction in the Little Miami watershed, which received no equivalent infrastructure investment. The engineering answer existed. The service boundary excluded Chilo from it. The county map continued to show the same town at the same coordinates, no notation for diminishment. No symbol for a place that persisted in cartography while contracting in every other measure. Dozens of communities like Chilo dotted the Ohio Valley, places that had survived the flatboat trade, the steamboat era, the first generation of railroads. Now outlasting the flood itself, one census at a time. The Baltimore and Ohio freight line was running again by early April. As he moved east along the Ohio through April, the flood's mark remained, debris on fences and trees at the old high water line. The final notation about Chilo is sparse. The church still standing above the flood line, the street grid preserved in silt below it. The courthouse map in Batavia not yet updated. 3 observations without conclusion. He never looked back. The pattern in the notes is consistent everywhere. He entered places, witnessed them, and left. The road moved in one direction only. He moved with it, always forward, never returning. This is the kind of history worth following. The roads no one else recorded, the weeks that slipped through the official count. If you know something about the 1913 Ohio flood, Clermont County, or the towns the maps still show, leave it in the comments. History tends to remember more than it admits. And if you want more of this, subscribe. The road keeps going.